have the frost on the chin.
Yeah, I look like I ate one of those snowballs when you're a kid. Took a bite out of it, stuck it on my chin.
Got all stuck on your chin.
Right. Hey, welcome
Great.
to Over 50 Starting Over. I'm Barry Edwards.
And I'm Merle Garrison.
And coming at you today from Florida, Sarasota here, on vacation, but the show must go on. And so that's what we're making that happen. So apologize here for audio problems, wind. A garbage truck just went by, two old ladies on their tricycles. You're going to see that stuff.
That's pretty cool, though. I mean, it's like you're a remote reporter. You're on the scene right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I could have been on the beach, but I need Wi-Fi first.
Right. Yeah, that's important.
So Merle, thinking about the O5O end of the show, you know what has been on my mind is time, and so here Lisa and I are trying to take time on our vacation to recharge our batteries, and I preach that people should take time throughout every day, at least some time, to recharge your batteries, do some things that you enjoy, so your own personal time. And Lisa struggles with that. She is not producing, she is feeling guilty. I, on the other hand, can be the opposite, where I do a lot of research. I have to do a lot of research for all ends of marketing and writing and things like that. And, it's so easy to go down rabbit holes. All of a sudden you start reading some stuff that has nothing to do with your research, that
right.
YouTube videos, because I do a lot of research on YouTube. Then there's the whole thing about at night, am I using my time productively when I'm watching Jordan Peterson videos, or is that entertainment? Because that's what I really enjoy doing. Or listening to a Joe Rogan podcast where they're talking about anything and everything under the sun. And I like the educational ones, where he's got somebody like a Jordan Peterson on, or a whole lot of other people just like that. Is that a waste? Is that productive time, or is that me time, entertainment, recharge batteries time?
Maybe it's both, because this is there goes one of those bicycles. I love it. But it could be both. I mean, I have the same kind of thing going through my head too, because I have things that I like to study, and in fact right now I just happen to have this book here next to me that I have been just focused on. This is it right here. It's the New Deal or Raw Deal, FDR, how FDR's economic legacy has damaged America. And then I wonder, I personally like reading stuff like that. It's
Sure.
interesting to me. And then I think, am I just doing this for me? Or is there something about this that I need to have inside of my brain? Maybe even for this show, or
Sure.
maybe it's just something important about life that I'm supposed to know about. So, these are the things that go through my head as well.
It's, now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of like, if what you're doing to recharge your batteries, if it's completely opposite from what you do for a profession, maybe you're doing the wrong thing.
Maybe, but at the same time, you start to think, is life more than just your profession? And isn't it important for us to have our minds stimulated by these, especially educational type media, where we expand our brains? Isn't that something healthy? And doesn't it make us more, I don't know, of a well-rounded people? The one thing that I know is, as you're watching the podcasts that you watch, and I'm reading the books that I read and the podcasts that I look at as well, we interact with people all around us every day. And, besides the, hey, how's the weather kind of thing going on, we can have in-depth conversations. I know we're going to get to the debates later on today, but if you have these ideas on the inside of you, it causes you to be able to think through those things and kind of reason in your own mind, so that you can have competent conversations with people your kids or your family or your next door neighbor that actually have content and meaning and that they're well thought out. And I think these things are healthy for just being a good human being.
I think that's a really important point. And, you know, the one thing that is kind of an integral part of over 50 starting over, the concept is that we are social beings. And I say, I mean, like bees, like ants, like, you know, any of these species that are social, that are interdependent. That's what we are. That's why we cluster in cities, and very few of us want to go out somewhere remote and Unabomber it. You know, it's very anti-human. You know, we are dependent, socially dependent on each other, and so cooperation is very important. We've mentioned before, when you're going through bouts of anxiety, any mental discomfort, a professional clinician, the first thing they'll tell you is help somebody. Help an old lady across the street. Do some volunteer work. Do things like this. This is the kind of stuff that gets you feeling right again. It's sharing love. And so I guess what you're saying is, when you're following your passions of, even on your own time, ingesting the material that you like, that you find interesting, and then you share it with people. Sharing, I guess, is the key word there. You know,
true.
I think it all kind of comes back around. It's kind of circular.
Well, and I also think that, you know, God puts these desires into your heart. And a lot, you know, we tend to think, well, I came up with that on my own, but I really believe that we were all born for such a time as this. And so if you're following your heart, and usually that's what you're doing in your spare time, you know, if you're drawn to something, then there's probably a reason for that. There's probably a reason why you're looking for that type of information. Have you ever noticed that? I noticed this where I like to read the Bible, and one of the things that I read is the book of Proverbs. Proverbs is what they call the book of wisdom, and so there's 31 of them, 31 chapters. And the weird thing that I find, and I find this with my daily devotion too, is when I read that, usually whatever I'm reading, something pertains to that later on that day that I just read. It probably happens with everything else as well. Just whatever it is that you're reading, a little bit later on that day, or whatever you're listening to, some kind of situation will come up, and you'll have to fall back on that information that for some reason you were led to because you had this desire. Do you find that to be the same?
Oh, in so many ways. I got so many ways I could comment on this. I'm trying to figure out which avenue I want to go down. For one, I've told Lisa this for years, is like when I go to a bookstore or a library, I never read fiction. I like to read things or listen to things that are helpful to me, metaphysical and stuff like that. Elaine, I'll get that stuff. So I tell her a book will just jump right off the shelf at me. Not kidding.
Same.
Exactly what I needed at that moment in time. And it really seems like that. The other avenue I was going to say to respond to you is what you and I say a lot. There's no such thing as coincidences.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
Which brings me to something I was planning on talking this stuff segues right into the metaphysical stuff. And I was going to go a different direction related to time, but something else I was thinking a lot about lately that pertains to what we're talking about is, have you ever given thought to or read anything about there's a chance that we might be living in the Matrix? If you know what I mean?
You know, that's funny. I've thought a lot about that, actually.
Yeah. Well, someone said, I would have looked this up if I'd known I was going to bring it up, but somebody recently said, I don't remember who, but a very important author, respected for his intelligence and insight, said that it's almost irrefutable that we are in the Matrix. And here we go, got a truck.
It's that same guy coming back.
Knew it was going to happen.
No, but he's going home now.
Yeah, there we go.
It was just entertainment.
Yeah.
I can hear you, though.
He said you can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
He said it's almost inevitable that we are in the Matrix if here, follow this line of thinking. It gets pretty freaky. But since you can imagine it already, and you've seen the evolution of it from video games that were so simplistic when we were kids that have graduated to these like role-playing games that are very realistic, and you choose certain actions and it responds to you in a certain way. Artificial intelligence. And we see, so if you can go from Space Invaders to this in our lifetime, then you can clearly imagine a next step of it being so realistic and auto-responding, the AI, artificial intelligence, being 100% realistic to the point nobody can tell the difference. I mean, if you can see the step in evolution from Space Invaders to the modern role-playing games, extrapolate that out another gigantic leap forward, and that's where you're at. So if we can imagine that and see that evolution, then isn't it likely that that has already happened infinite amount of times?
Well, it's interesting what you're saying, and you're talking, you started out with the subject of time. Yeah. And I think these things are really, closely linked together, right? That time and space are hooked up together. And from my own faith, it says that God lives outside of time. And so if we try to imagine what that must be like, it's almost like you have this ball in your hand, which is time, and you're outside of that time. Mm-hmm. And Jesus Christ, it says, was crucified from the foundations of the world, meaning that even when he entered into time, it's as if the crucifixion actually had already happened even before he was born. And so into the world. So as he looks at time, he can see the whole thing from the beginning to end right now. The Bible also states that we were crucified with Christ as Christians, and that we are inside of his seed. In other words, that means that I am where Jesus is right now, which is at the right hand of the Father. So in other words, that's where I really am right now, and that I actually live outside of time, sort of like the Matrix, but I'm in this physical body inside of time as well. God from his seat can see my whole life beginning to end, and that
neighbor's coming.
Oh, cool. Well, God can see me from beginning to end, but I'm still in time.
I'm Kathy. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Kathy. Nice to meet you. I'm Barry.
Tell her I said hi.
Merle says hi.
Hi, Merle.
Hi, Kathy. But I mean, think about that. That is pretty much the concept of the Matrix, is that, you're really in this place of safety. And here's the other thing, is that in the Matrix, the movie, Keanu Reeves is inside of that pod, and all the things that he actually needs are coming through this tube and feeding him in there. And he's in this warm, safe place. That's the reality. But here on Earth, in his body, all these crazy things are happening, and drama and life threatening types of things are happening. But in reality, he's absolutely safe, and nothing bad can happen to him. And I really believe that matches up pretty closely with the reality of what's in the Bible as well. I'm in very much agreement with what you're saying, Barry.
Merle, when I was a kid, and I always remember this, my mother used to take me and a friend, like a neighbor or something, to the YMCA to go swimming a lot, I think it was like every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday night, something like that. And I remember just sitting there looking around. I'm probably 12, and I just want to go, all right, everybody stop. I know it. I know this is a facade. I know this isn't real. I know it. And I really felt that. And I just,
wow.
Did you ever see that Jim Carrey movie?
Truman?
Yes.
Yes.
When I saw that, I was like, that's what I always thought. I always thought everything was everyone's just filming me and watching me go through this production of a life, which is what we're talking about as well. You know, it's another way of saying the same thing we're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. When I watched that movie, what a freaky movie that is, right? But I
I know it's
mean,
great in its concept,
I
like
thought
because it
so
hit,
too.
you know.
I thought the concept was great too, and just how there would be scenarios that were put in the Truman Show, that were put in his way so that he
Yeah,
could experience these things, and then this host of audience were watching him and just like, wow, and they couldn't wait to see what would happen next. Again, this
yeah.
relates to the Bible. It says that
Mm.
there's a cloud of witnesses in heaven that are seeing us as we're going through this, just like that audience on the Truman Show. And it also says that they're rooting us on.
Oh,
They all loved Truman, and they
uh,
wanted to see good things happen to him.
so
And this is
we're in a living
so.
reality show.
Yes, it is. And the other thing too is what we can take from that is that everything's going to be okay, no matter
Mm,
what happens, and no matter what scenario we're in, everything's going to be okay. And as we relate this to over 50 starting over, it's the same message,
mm,
is that it's scary. Truman would be out there thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? But the
mm.
solution was already planned out and already
Yeah,
right there in front of him. He just couldn't see it. And this is where we are right now. And this is why we can't squelch our dreams. I really believe that these dreams that we have on the inside of us are put inside of us for a reason. God put those on the inside of us because they're supposed to be accomplished. That is your mission in life. And so go after your dreams, be bold about it, put yourself in situations where that seem
challenge.
impossible, but just go for it. And I heard somebody say, shoot for the stars. You may just hit the moon.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
get to the moon. That's a pretty good thing, right?
right.
So go for it. And you see the people that even people who have written into our show who have done that, and
Yeah.
they're having success because they had a dream.
Hmm.
Everything starts with a dream first. And I
Hmm.
believe that these are things that are part of our destiny. And I'm talking myself, really, as much as I'm talking to you or our
We
audience.
all are, Merle. You know, everybody listening is relating to that. I certainly relate to this. And it's so many things that you said there. There's the obstacles that come up in our life that seem like horrible things that happen to us are really, it's the angels, what have you, knocking you back into where you should be going, and or saying like, no wonder you're so stuck here and feel unhappy because you're not following what you're supposed to be following.
Boy, that is such a
That
great
calling.
thing. Yeah, yeah. Even in our failures, I remember I was
Yeah.
working for a company called Broadview Security, and I was having success there. I was Rookie of the Year, and then we got bought by another company called ADT, and everybody's familiar with that security
Mhm.
company. And I had a terrible time over there. Not knocking the company. I think they do a good job with what they do, but it just wasn't for me.
Was
And
this your first job here in LA?
it no, it was not. It was my third job in LA.
Okay.
But anyway, I was working for this company and just having a terrible time. And I ended up leaving there, and that's a really interesting story how I left. But it actually opened up an opportunity to start working for this company that I've mentioned many times called Extension Healthcare. And that was probably one of the best professional experiences that I've had in my life. And I did well financially, better than any other place I'd ever been. But if I hadn't have had that failure at ADT,
Ah,
none of that would have ever happened. And
right.
I've found in my life that the failures that we have, or at least the ones that I've had, have always led to these tremendous blessings, even
Mm,
though the failure part hurt quite a bit.
yes.
Uh,
Yes,
but
it
but
does.
I think the faster you can pick yourself up and start moving forward, even if it's only an inch a day. I remember when I was starting to work out, and this was a while ago, and I wanted to start jogging. And I went out there, had my track shoes on and everything, and I could only make it about a half a block before I was completely winded. And I could have just given up right there. But what I decided was, and you know how you're on the sidewalk, I decided, tomorrow I'm just going to try to make a few more squares ahead of where I was yesterday. And I kept doing that. And pretty soon I was running miles. And just that's really about over 50 starting over and just keep moving forward. Move forward.
I have another way I want to put that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like your analogy. And then to put it very directly at how it pertains to my daily life is I have been battling overwhelm a lot. I have so many different things that I need to do, should be doing, and trying to organize them in my head and all of that. And with the technology and everything's always changing, there's always more being added to that plate. And so there are times when I am just spinning in my head. Anxiety starts building out of control. And what I have to do, this relates directly to what you said, is I have to pick one task, no matter how small, one of those, and do it and cross that off the list. And that's just climbing that first rung of the ladder. And then if you can get that momentum going, you get back in the game.
So profound. I absolutely agree with that. And I think it was Jordan Peterson that taught me something about making your bed in the morning. And right. And so that's
cleaning up your affairs, something like that.
Yeah. Well,
cleaning your room. That's what he says. Clean your room.
Yeah. And his whole point was that's the first thing you do when you get out of bed is make your bed, clean your room, and now check. You've actually accomplished something, and now you've set the pace for the rest of the day.
That's great.
You're an accomplisher now. And I know again, Anne Marie's listening. I did not make the bed. I would just get out of bed and she'd be like, "Are you going to make the bed?" And why? We're just going to get back in it,
Every man says that. Every man and woman go through this.
Right. But I heard that. And sorry, it wasn't because of my wife telling me this, but I heard this from Jordan Peterson, and I thought, that makes total sense. And now I'm in that habit, and he's right. It works. And also everybody's happier here at home about it too. So it's a good thing.
That makes all the difference in the world. Okay, got another passenger going by.
Oh, look at that.
Yes.
They're speeding by at 2 or 3 miles per hour.
Yes, I have no doubt that this looks pretty bizarre to people out here.
I love it. I think it looks great. It's so fun. I can't wait for the next person to come by.
No kidding.
You should call them over, and then we'll start an interview.
Yeah, I actually thought about asking my mother-in-law to come over and, hey, want to say hi? She probably would too. Okay, you know what? Just because I'm dying to talk about the debates last night. Yes. Can we just segue right into that?
We can. I also want to bring up Black History Month as well. So
go for it.
All right. Well, let's start with that because here we are at the end of February. It's February 26th. So another Black History Month is just about past us. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I feel about Black History Month. And what I did was I actually printed out an article and I edited it I want to read it actually, but I've taken out most of the content and just gotten to the meat of the matter. But I've always felt like, why do we need to have Black History Month? And I actually feel like the debate leads into this whole conversation as well, because there was a lot of talk about Black and brown people there. And I have to say that I personally resent it. I don't look at myself as a Black or African American. I look at myself as an American. And I'm just as American as everybody else. And so I think as I look at my neighbors all around me, I don't look at them as, oh, that's an Italian American, or that's an Hungarian American, or a Jewish American. I just look at other people as Americans. And I personally don't want to be looked at any differently. I don't look at myself any differently. So This article was put out last week by Larry Elder, who is a conservative. He's a black conservative radio announcer, and that's actually pretty rare. You don't actually. He's got a talk show. I admire the guy quite a bit, but he put this out, and I'm just going to read from it. As for America's annual Black History Month, actor Morgan Freeman spoke for many during this 2005 exchange with CBS's Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. And so here's Wallace. Black History Month, you find Freeman ridiculous. Why? You're going to relegate my history to a month? Come on. What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? Come on, tell me. And Wallace says, I'm Jewish. And Freeman says, okay, which month is Jewish History Month? There isn't one. Why not? Do you want one? No, I don't either. I don't want Black History Month. Black history is American history. Well, how are we going to get rid of racism until Freeman? Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman. I'm not going to say I know this white guy named Mike Wallace. Hear what I'm saying? It goes on to say this. Despite many years of Black History Februaries, many know little to nothing about the vast role by Arab and Muslim slavers in African slave trade. The practice began centuries before European slavers brought and transported slaves out of Africa and continued well after European slavery ended. During February, students K through 12, of course, are taught about slavery. What many teachers seem not to emphasize is that slavery is as ancient as humankind and that it was practiced nearly everywhere.
Absolutely.
As to the Arab-Muslim slave trade, Ghanaian professor and minister John Azuma helped set the record straight in The Legacy of Arab Islam in Africa. In an interview about his book, Azuma said the following, and this is pretty shocking stuff. While 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped across the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by Muslims. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the trans-Saharan and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%.
Oh.
While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines in harems and for military service. While many children were born to the slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States today. Very few descendants of the slaves who ended up in the Middle East survived. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. It's estimated that possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to the South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. However, a minimum of 28 million Africans were enslaved in the Muslim Middle East. Since at least 80% of those captured by the Muslim slave traders were calculated to have died before reaching the slave markets, it is believed that the death toll from 1,400 years of Arab and Muslim slave raids into Africa could have been as high as 112 million.
Wow.
Mr. Freeman is right. Black history is American history. It ought not to be relegated to a month, and slavery ought not be relegated to only the European slave trade. The truth about slavery includes the long, extensive, and deadly role played by Arab and Muslim slavers. So,
hey, I have to say, to capitalize on exactly that, is what's going on today in the sex slave trade industry is, I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but they're staggering. And I think that it all blows away that when we think of slavery, and you're right. Oh, when we say slavery, oh, we only think it was what happened here in America 150 years ago, what have you. But what's going on today, all across the United States in the sex trade industry, slave trade industry, that it's ridiculous. I wish I had the numbers in front of me. I don't, but it's ongoing. And by talking about this, by trying to keep this ancient practice alive, and it's kind of diminishing what's going on currently right now under our noses. With every race.
Yes, I totally agree. It's not about black people. It's about humans. That's really what I was talking about Black History Month, is that really it's American history, and Americans are being enslaved today. I saw this movie. Michael Douglas was in this movie, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it had everything to do with the sex slave trade and also the border of Mexico. And I'm sorry, I'm getting two movies mixed up right here. Michael Douglas was not in this movie, but what was happening, and this was a true story, is that they had made these routes where they could steal people, kidnap women, and then take them across the border of Mexico and enslave them as sex slaves. And it was a really devastatingly violent movie and terrifying. And at the end of this movie, it stated that about 1 million people a year, mostly women, are kidnapped and stolen into the sex slave industry.
I saw this movie,
and it was it was staggering when I thought about it. And it made me so angry to think that this was happening as well.
I actually made a Facebook post about it. That's how moved I was, because I wasn't ever posting on Facebook. But the star of that movie was in that. This happened to her. It was an account of her. If we're talking about the same movie, and it certainly sounds like it, well, she starred in the movie about what happened to her. And it was, so that made it even more powerful. And it was the numbers at the end that I was like, whoa, oh my God. And we don't talk about it.
No one talks about it.
Right. No, but we'll talk about the stuff that's been done and over with for over 100 years, you know?
Well, and this is why I think about our border security and how important that is. And it's happening within our borders as well. But being able to capture somebody and take them across into another country like that, where they're just never going to be heard from again.
No.
It's really just a crazy thing. But as I said, this is happening within our borders. I remember the guy, his name was Castro over in Cleveland, that had those people, those women down in his basement. And fortunately, somebody coming through his backyard had heard some screams down there, and that's how they were finally rescued. But what a terrifying thing that could happen.
Just to set the record straight, one of the 3 women actually found just a brief window of opportunity.
Oh, that's right.
Ran out the door, ran to a neighbor's house and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I forget her name. Hey, I'm this girl." And they're like, "Oh my God, she's been missing for 10 years." You know?
Right.
What a story.
It was really, I mean, and think about this. This is happening all over the place. I'm very familiar with that section of town. Not a good section of town whatsoever. Right. But then I think about this homeless problem that we have here in California, and all of these tents that are just lined up, and how easily it would be that someone a woman could be walking down the street and, oh, I'm going to have to pass by those tents. And how easy would it be for somebody to get snatched into one of those tents and never heard from again? Right.
Oh, for sure. This came about because you were talking about Black History Month, and the importance that's put upon it that you don't think should be. And I agree with you, but what if, so Morgan Freeman said, how to stop racism is to stop talking about racism. I half agree with that. I see both sides, and I see where the far left gets carried away with trying to, they overcompensate for the racism thing. If we don't talk about it at all, if that becomes the mantra, see, these things can possibly happen at childhood because children are so primal, and we always, I think, put black people in their own little box and don't really talk about Asians or anyone else or Italians or Irish or, that kind of thing, because it's so visibly obvious, okay, the difference in our color of skin. And so if you're not allowed to talk about it and you let kids figure it out on their own, well, they get mean because of seeing somebody that looks different than them. And therefore, there's the racism.
I don't think he was saying not to talk about racism. I think his point was, let's stop referring to each other as, oh, there's Barry, my white friend, and there's this guy, my Asian friend. Sure. No, Barry, you're one of my best friends in all of life, and I don't think of you as my white friend.
Sure.
That's really the point that he was making right there. We could talk about racism. I just read a whole thing about how racism caused slavery for 1,400 years. This is something we can speak about, but as we look at each other and talk to each other and interact with each other, the first thing that comes to mind shouldn't be, oh, I'm dealing with an Asian right now, so let me relate to him in an Asian way. Or here's something that I really hate, and this happens to me quite a lot, especially when I was growing up. And I grew up in Hudson, Ohio, and it's mostly a white neighborhood. And so I would be with my friends, and they'd introduce me to somebody, and it would be like everybody else was, hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? And then when they went to shake my hand, it was like, what's up, bro? And I was just like, what? Why? Why did they be like speaking Ebonics to me? And I'm like, is that really? That's what I'm talking about right there. Is that why not see me as an American like everybody else? I mean, when I was going through school in that school system, I didn't want to be the one black guy in school and you have to treat me differently. I wanted to be like everybody else, and I think that's what everybody wants. So. I go back to Black History Month. Why not teach about Black history all year long? Why does it have to be 1 month? And isn't that the definition of racism, where Black people are elevated to this level, so we have a whole month just dedicated to Black people? What about the white people? What about the Asian people? What about the Indian people? Is there Indian History Month? Is there Jewish History Month? Is that what you want? Is that what we want? That's not what I want. I think we're Americans, and we've contributed. We could say that this person was black or show a picture of that person, but why make it this deal about it has to be this black victory? I don't think that actually helps us to get over racism. I think that actually pours gasoline on the whole thing. My opinion, but that's what I've seen out there.
Where does this fall into? Because this is racism too. We talked about before about the outcry about the Washington Redskins logo and name of their team, and Cleveland Indians logo with Chief Wahoo. And, it's because one person found a voice, could be heard, and got on their soapbox, and found an identity, created an identity for themselves by speaking out against it. I said back then, what I'm afraid of, the ultimate outcome of this as it keeps going forward, is we have to eradicate all celebration of Native Americans altogether. And then they're forgotten. Is that what we want?
So
because it's a celebration. It was not.
I agree.
Those things are not derogatory. So where does Black History Month fall in with this kind of discussion?
Celebrating with a sports team by saying the Washington Redskins, to me, is different than having a Redskin History Month. I just don't think that those are the same things. I don't see how those things line up together. To me, it's I think that if I were if I were a different race, I would be thinking, well, what about American Indian Month, or what about Asian American Month? I think it eliminates other races, and it elevates another race above other races. Or you could also look at it as, who came up with that? I mean, are they pandering to me, which really leads into the Democratic
Oh boy, I was going to say that. Yes.
debate. But you watched the Democratic debates. I watched it last night. I wanted to hear what your take on the whole thing was.
I thought it was pretty ridiculous. I'll be honest with you that I couldn't watch the last 15 minutes because I had enough. But there's just so many things. Like at the end of the thing, I'll say this: it's an audition to see who can go up against Trump, not who can be president.
Right.
And that was clear. And I saw someone like. Who made the biggest impression on me was Klobuchar, and her hand gestures. It just looked like she spent hours and hours practicing all of these different things, how she was going to say it. Everything sounded like she was reading off a teleprompter, and I swear to God, she's got like enough hand gestures there that I thought she was going to pull a muscle or something. She's probably sore today as a result, but. It was way too rehearsed, so I have to say that I could not see her being able to hold her own in a real debate because she can't think spontaneously, clearly. You know, I'm not sure what you thought about that, but I thought Buttigieg, I can never say these names right, Buttigieg, Judge.
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
I thought he was the best coming out of that debate, but he's boring too. I mean, he's just a bit boring, which again, see, this is the audition here. Not, well, can he be a great president? I think if I wanted to ask you this, I'm just going to interrupt myself right here to ask you this. If you could not have a Republican president, if you had to choose one of those candidates, or even one of the candidates that weren't on this stage, who would you pick?
Oh my gosh.
To run the country for 4 years.
That is a great question, Barry. And I personally don't think any of them qualify to be I probably would stay home because I could not, with my integrity, I could not check the box for any one of those people. Each one of them in their own way would not be my choice whatsoever.
Yeah.
I do agree with you that Buttigieg came off very measured and more professional than everybody else. But I do think that anybody's going to look like that if they stay measured in the face of such anger that I saw. Each one of them seemed really rude, spastic. I mean, it kind of reminded me of Welcome Back, Kotter with the sweat hogs, where Horshack was just like, ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yeah.
That was so childish and unprofessional in the way that they spoke over top of each other. And then when they ran out of time, they kept on speaking, and they sometimes for 30 or so seconds, and the moderators couldn't handle them whatsoever.
You're right.
I thought that really, as I take a look at each one of them would spell disaster for the country. I don't think that any of them, I would find probably the Green Party and vote for somebody there, or the Libertarian Party. I would have to find another person, because each one of them stands for policies that will bankrupt the country. And that's really what I look at is our future, and prudence is very important here. We're already $20 trillion in debt. And when we take a look at what that actually means to the future of our country, and the interest that we will be paying alone off of that as we go into the future, each one of these people are talking about adding upwards of $30 trillion to that deficit, money that we actually don't have right now. And when you take a look at our posterity, and really the founding fathers were so interested in posterity, what happens to the future generations, this will cause them to be in a greatly weakened state against really all of the other countries that are out there. We're already struggling to keep our heads above water, and each one of them by their by their policies of we're gonna give here and we're gonna give there, it's weakening our country, and it's making it a place where there could be trouble. Now, I showed you that book that I was reading about FDR, and when you take a look at the New Deal policies over a period of 8 years from 32 until 40, the unemployment rate, even though he was spending literally billions and billions of dollars to try to put people to work and all of these programs, the unemployment rate stayed at about 20% throughout the entire time. We went into great debt. We diverted money from the military into these programs. So our military was about a tenth of the size of the German military by the time the war started. We had not invested in technology in our Navy, in our Air Force, in our Army. We didn't even have ammunition. Our factories were not set up to provide for defenses. And when Hitler started to make his run and started to invade these countries, FDR sent letters over to Hitler asking them to solve their differences peacefully. And Hitler and his team just laughed. Well, why would they laugh? Well, because we were no threat to them. We didn't have the resources to be a threat to them, and therefore they were emboldened to take over all of Europe. Now, and when I take a look at something like that, it seems to me that because of the policies that FDR had, which were very much like the policies that I was hearing during that debate, that weakens the best defense that the entire world has. And here's something to think about. If we had kept up with our military and kept up, I heard Benjamin Netanyahu say this the other day, peace through strength. If you keep up your strength, that's actually what causes the peace. Now, if Hitler would have gone ahead and if things would have happened, maybe the letters that FDR would have sent to Hitler may have curtailed the activity. Well, let's say that it didn't, and we actually did get drawn into the war. Remember, it wasn't until 1944 that D-Day happened. The war had started in 1939. That was 5 years into World War II. We couldn't muster up the strength for a D-Day invasion for that long because we didn't have the resources to make that happen. Now, once we did make it happen, within about a year, less than a year, we had actually destroyed Hitler's army and the war in Europe was over. But if we would have been ready, you think about what the final solution was for Hitler. That didn't happen until the second half of the war. And when I mean the final solution, I mean the death camps and actually putting Jews to death. That didn't happen until the second half of the war. If we would have been ready right from the very beginning, I'd say that about 6 million Jewish people would have survived and would not have been killed by Hitler's death camps. So these are the policies that I'm seeing that are running in the Democratic Party right now, and they're things that I could never vote for that. I see them putting, and not only that, I see them, they seem to be wanting to divert. I mean, where's all this money going to come from? I mean, seriously.
Hey, I got to ask you, because once again, Bernie Sanders is rightfully taking a lot of heat. Okay, a lot of criticism. Have you seen how all over the place he is at trying to answer that question?
Oh, yeah.
And he's been peddling this stuff for over 30 years.
How is it that he doesn't know this? And here's another thing about FDR is that they were asking him the same questions before he became the president. Where is this money going to come from? And Bernie's taking a page out of FDR's book. He wouldn't answer the question. And so it's because He knew where he was going to take it from. He just didn't want to answer the question because people wouldn't vote him into the presidency if he had answered the question. It's the exact same thing that's happening. And as long as you're talking about Bernie, what about the piece where he's talking about Castro and that Castro had done a good thing by spreading literacy throughout Cuba? What is your thought around that, Perry?
It infuriates me, to tell you the truth. And I got a FedEx truck parked right behind me.
That's okay. We can hear you well.
Okay, I'm struggling to hear you, to be honest. But yeah, and wasn't Sanders backpedaling on that last night? He did. He tried to say that he doesn't agree with, I forget how he said it, with these kind of countries, the way they run these countries. But that's not to say that they can't do one or two things right. I think he said that.
Yeah, he did. In fact, right from the beginning, he actually said, well, that's a good thing that he put the literacy thing in there and being able to call something good when something actually good happened was important to him. So, but the fact of the matter is that Cuba before Castro was actually the highest ranked literate country in all of the Caribbean before Castro came in 1958 with his triumphal entry. So really, Castro didn't show up with a boatload of books or a truckload of books. He showed up with an agenda to arrest thousands and execute thousands of people immediately that stood against him. So I just have a problem with the fact that you're trying to find good in the Cuban government. And when you start to look at his history, I mean, the man spent his honeymoon in the USSR. Who does that? Who would want to do something like that?
So I don't know what
look
makes
at those policies. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I just said I don't know what makes Bernie tick. I really don't know how he could be in American politics all his life and keep trying to make sense of this to other Americans, and it's amazing to me that he has the following that he does, but I also think it's out of the anxiety and desperation that people have as this world gets so damn complicated, is what I think,
Well, I think that you're making a good point here. I believe that as we listened to the debates last night, I heard a lot about African Americans. I heard a lot about Hispanics and Indians as well. In fact,
way more than I ever wanted to hear.
Well, and it makes you wonder, why are they doing this? Well, first off, we know one thing, that without the black and brown vote, none of those people can win the primaries, and they can't actually win the nomination. That's really what the Democratic Party is focused on. Notice that you don't hear anything about the plight of poor white people. I think the only time I heard that during the debate came from Buttigieg, and it was actually a passing statement.
They were pandering so obviously. And the worst moment, I think the highlight of the whole thing was that when that Tom Steyer came out with his reparations BS. Did that make you just want to punch the TV screen, or
yes,
what? And he didn't get the applause that he thought. I think in his head, he thought he was going to get a standing ovation.
Well, it's funny that he said that he was the only one up there that stood for reparations, because I saw Al Sharpton interviewing several of these people and asking, would you vote for, or would you approve reparations? And I remember Elizabeth Warren, without even hesitating, saying yes. And so, I mean, they were all saying yes to that. It was almost like they had to say it in order to pass the screening test. So, but when you take a look at reparations, what exactly does that mean? I mean,
what does that mean? Who receives them?
Who does get that? I mean,
do you take a DNA test and you have to have? Yeah. How do you decide where the cutoff line is? You're going to have a lot of pissed off Americans when half of us are mixed anymore with, so it's silly from the get-go, but it goes right back to, I know that you are probably doing this anyway. Going right back to what you were saying about Morgan Freeman's talking about, well, you just need to stop talking about this. That's how you stop racism. And they just keep putting it right in your face and to the most ridiculous lengths, such as reparations.
Well, here's the thing, Barry, is that what I'm seeing, and I'm especially seeing this on college campuses, the videos that I'm seeing is that here you have Black people that are in college that have an opportunity, but now you have them so focused on the fact that they can't achieve anything without government intervention. And that if somebody is racist, or calls them the N-word, that means that they feel relegated to the fringes and that they can't achieve and that there's nothing that they can do about it. It gives them a hopeless feeling. Now, I really believe that that's part of the strategy that the Democratic Party has, is divide people up into groups, tell them that they're victims, that they can't survive without the government coffers, which are the taxpayers' money that they feel free to take from people that are actually doing something and give it to people that aren't doing anything. I just really believe that all this does is lead to hopelessness. And really, from the debate that I watched the whole thing, Anne Marie and I did, we had a very difficult time watching it, and really. At the end, I felt depressed.
Okay, like I said, I couldn't make it through the last 15 minutes. So how did it wrap up?
Yeah, so it was more of the same. They went, the last part was they went around and they talked about what their motto was in life and what the biggest misconception was of them. It was stupid. Okay, it was completely meaningless. It didn't actually hold water. But what I want to say is that at the end, I felt frustrated. I felt irritated. I felt depressed. I felt angry. I thought, what has this world come to? And then let's just talk about the fact that all of these policies that they're promoting take large, we talked about this a little bit, but it takes large amounts of taxpayer money to make these things happen. And before the 1930s, the federal government didn't have any of these relief programs whatsoever. Sure. It was really a big taboo to even suggest that the federal government would do this. All of that was relegated to the state and local government and also to charities. The reason that it was set up that way is from a local standpoint, people can see. I mean, I can go out and see, oh, that guy needs help right there. No, that guy's just a freeloader right there. We're not going to give it to them. It also caused the states to be very prudent with how they doled out their money, and they were very watchful about how they gave it out. We only have limited funds. But when it shifted over to the federal government, then what that did was it gave incentive to the states to not really have to be prudent with their money. They could spend all of their money on whatever they wanted to and just depend on the federal government to give them money. Here in California, you can totally see how that's worked out, is that we got Super Tuesday coming up here in California, and you wouldn't believe some of the things that are on the ballot. It's actually mind-blowing. And it's like, what are you doing with all this money that we've already approved for you? Well, they're just, what it's done is it's fostered not only a sense of hopelessness for the people, but also this complete dependence on the federal government. Hey, all I have to do if I'm one of those people running for president in the Democratic Party is find the areas where the most voters are and then figure out what they want the most that I can buy for them and tell them I'm going to give that to them and get their votes. And now I'm going to take money from people from other states that are actually producing and give it to these people. And how is that really going to help? We've seen, like, for instance, the public housing crisis. I used to have a job where down in Cleveland, actually, where I was a salesperson and I was selling pagers, and I had the downtown area and I had the Near East Side. So I would be selling to businessmen downtown, but the Near East Side, a lot of times I was in the projects, people that were pimps, people that were doing nefarious activities. They wanted pagers, and I would go into these areas, and they were terrible. I mean, my skin would crawl when I would go in there. But these people had lived there for generations, and they're not leaving. It's a perpetual state that they're in, and a lot of them, you hear people say, if I do this, they're going to take away my check. So they're really in a bondage situation over there, and this seems to be exactly what they're promoting. I just want to say one other thing that's jumped out of the debate that I was completely appalled by, and it was something that Bernie Sanders said, and it had to do with legalizing marijuana. Now,
what did he say? I don't remember this. But
I don't really have a problem that part of it that he said. I think it's odd that that's his campaign platform, that he's legalizing marijuana, but I realize there are a lot of people in prison for selling it, and maybe that's, our prisons are filled up with people, and I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other on this one, but what he did say was he was going to legalize it. And not only that, he was going to put together for African Americans, Latinos, and Indians to help set them up so that they could start businesses selling marijuana.
I do remember that. And I was like, whoa, what? You're gonna help these, and he picks out the minorities to say, we'll help you become drug dealers. Because that's all you know what to do anyway.
See, that was the part. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you trying to say here? That this is the only profession that I know how to do, so because I'm black and I'm a drug dealer, so why not legalize it so you can help me to sell drugs to people? I mean, of course, my kids are going to be so proud of me that I have a weed store that the government helped me to do because I'm black. I mean, what? I mean, shouldn't people be outraged by this? That's sickening.
As you mentioned that, I can't believe we didn't lead the podcast with that now that you mentioned, because I forgot about it. But that should be headlines all over the United States right now.
I know. That seems to be the most prejudiced thing ever.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention real quick, please take a look at us at over50startingover.com. You can comment at mail@over50startingover.com or leave comments on our YouTube channel, Over 50 Starting Over. And Merle, I want to ask you, what did you think about, and we could get back to all of the whole racism that, of course, that was in that debate as well, but no one's mentioned Bloomberg. What did you think about his effort at rebounding?
Yeah, so I had one word written in my notes for Bloomberg, which was underwhelming.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. The guy has absolutely no charisma. It just, nothing really sticks, and everything he said just didn't really resonate with the audience. I don't see the big deal here with this guy.
Does anyone?
Here's what I thought was very interesting, though, and I don't even know, is this legal? But the commercials in between the debates, almost every single break, there was a Mike Bloomberg commercial in there. Did you notice that?
Well, I was watching on YouTube. I didn't see the commercials.
Oh. Well, I mean, wow.
Oh, yeah.
The guy
he's trying to buy his way in, but you know what's kind of neat about this is it shows, look, everybody thinks that politics is all about money. And, for some reason, I'm not hearing a lot of talk about the super PACs, at least not yet, because I think that is completely illegal. And it's got to be unconstitutional. I mean, there's got to be a way that is unconstitutional to have corporations get behind people to, influence the outcome. I mean, screw Russia. We got enough problems with the internal doctoring of the vote in that regard. Oh, I'm ringing, and I lost my thought. My phone is ringing, and I lost my thought there.
I had one other comment regarding the debate with Bernie Sanders, and Benjamin Netanyahu is in a political election right now against Benny Gantz, and it's very, very similar to what's happening here in the United States between Trump and the and I would say the left here in the United States. He's having the exact same problems with the media there. He is being attacked by a leftist. They're actually they're actually saying that Trump is like Hitler, which is very odd when you take a look at what he's actually trying to do for Israel. But I heard Bernie Sanders talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, and he called Netanyahu a racist. And I just want to say that if you're going to be the president of our country, you're going to have to work with countries like Israel. And how receptive are you going to be in Israel if you've called the prime minister of Israel a racist? I don't understand that. How can you negotiate with that guy? Joe Biden himself called the president of China a thug, and also the leader of North Korea a thug. And I just think, and very angry too. I mean, boy, didn't Joe seem like every time he got a chance, he just yelled.
I put in my notes, it looked like Biden actually got a good night's sleep. You know, because he really has made an attempt to come off lively.
But I mean, okay, so you're the president. What do you think? You're just going to yell at these people and they're going to say, "Oh, okay." I mean, I just think there's some diplomacy that you need to use. And if I'm the president of either one of those nations, I'm not supporting them at all, but if you've called me a racist or a thug, I'm probably not going to want to work with you in any way.
You know what I think, Merle? Tell me what you think about this. Don't you think he's trying to be a little Trump-like there?
I don't think so, no, because
I think that's what he sees at face value. Well, Trump comes out there and calls people names, so I'm going to do that. Trump does it with a strategy. He picks them up, then knocks them down, and then says, "I'll pick you back up again."
Well, if you take a look at his work that he's done with China so far, I've not heard him say a disparaging thing about the Chinese president. I actually saw Trump walk across the border into North Korea and shake hands with the North Korean leader, and I've never seen any other president do anything like that. His whole strategy in working in his foreign diplomacy is not to tear people down by calling them names. He's actually working with them, and he's actually said about each one, well, at least about the president of China, that he likes him. So, I mean, he's gotten a lot of flack for saying that as well. But how are you going to be able to negotiate with somebody that thinks that they hate you? It's just not possible. And as a president, you're just weakening yourself before you actually enter into the office. I just think it's a faux pas that they're making, and they're trying to win votes. But this isn't how once you get into office, you've clipped your wings.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. We're going to have to wrap up. We're at 1:07, and I am on vacation. But I want to ask you your final thoughts. Do you think Bernie's going to pull this out? Kind of looks like it, and that would be really weird if he does.
Yeah.
What do you think?
As I look at this, I mean, it's going to be interesting what happens with the South Carolina primary, and if Joe Biden actually can do what he says that he's going to do. But I mean, Joe Biden looked awful last night, and none of them actually looked good. It does seem to me that Bernie's got the momentum, and going into Super Tuesday, I know here in California, I don't think that he has a chance of not winning, and there's a lot of delegates here. I just believe that that's what we're going to see. And I don't know if Mike Bloomberg has a chance of buying this whole thing out, but he just looks awful up there. I just
did want to make the point that I don't think I totally made. Maybe that's where I got that phone call. I got distracted. That I find a real positive note in that the amount of money Bloomberg is putting out there is insane, and it doesn't seem like it's making a dent. And I find that to be a positive thing.
Well, this will be the first time that he's actually on the ballot, so that's really going to be interesting to see what happens here in South Carolina. I think that's going to be the litmus test as to how this goes forward.
When's the next debate?
You know, I don't think I can handle another one for another month. I'm not really sure when the next debate is.
Agree.
But Super Tuesday comes up. I guess we have the South Carolina elections this week, and then Super Tuesday is next Tuesday here. So I'll be voting in that one here in California. I believe that includes 14 states. So we should probably be seeing a debate soon after that.
Okay.
But my goodness, I need a break from that. That really that
Need a
took me
shower.
down a few pegs.
Hey, buddy, we got to get take off here. So stay tuned next week. And any parting words?
Yeah, make sure you share with your friends, like us, and share on all of the venues that we have. We really appreciate it, and don't forget to make comments, and we may read them on the air. They really do help us out.
They very much inspire us. Thank you, everybody. All right, Merle. See you next week.
Yep. See you, Barry.